When using Laravel Sanctum, you can get a 401 response for two reasons. Your SPA domain is not part of the Sanctum stateful domains list, or the active session cannot be found on the server. This can happen because you're not sending the session ID cookie, maybe it's not set at all, or maybe the request is not configured to include it. Another reason might be that the session has been destroyed on the server. You send the session ID, but the session no longer exists, so you get a 401 response. Or another case is when the session ID cookie cannot be decrypted. This can happen when you change your Laravel app key, for example. Now, when debugging a 401 response, the first thing you should do is open up the ensure frontend requests are stateful middleware. If you look at the handle method, you'll see that the frontend middleware is only applied if the request comes from a recognized frontend application. If we jump into this from frontend method, this takes the referrer or the origin and then checks if the domain is part of the Sanctum stateful domains list. The easiest way to debug this is, well, add a debug statement. We'll do log, debug, domain, and stateful. We'll then go in the browser, hit login, go ahead and open our Laravel log file, and here we have our domain and the Sanctum stateful domains list. Our domain is localhost 5173, and the Sanctum stateful domain list has localhost, localhost 3000, and so on. The idea is that our SPA domain is not part of the Sanctum stateful domains list, so we need to add it. If we open up the Sanctum configuration file, we have the stateful option that gets its value from the Sanctum stateful domains environment variable. So that means we can open our env file and set this to localhost 5173. Now, if we go in the browser, refresh, hit login, the request is successful and here is our user. Now, be careful. Make sure you're not adding an ending slash. For example, if I do this, it will not work. We get a 401 response. Make sure you're also not adding the protocol. If I do this, login, 401 response. So you only need to add the domain and the port if needed. So now it's working. We no longer get the 401 response. But let's look over the other scenarios as well. So let's say the session has been destroyed on the server. If I look at my session driver, we're using the database, which means I can open up Tinker and delete all the active sessions. And now if we go to our login method and comment out these two requests, so we only want to load the currently authenticated user. If we look here, we have a session ID cookie and a CSRF token, but when we make the request, we get a 401, even though we are sending the cookies. That's because even if we have a session ID cookie, if the session doesn't exist on the server, we get a 401 response. The only way to fix this is to simply re-log in. So if we do this, log in again, we are now authenticated. Finally, we have the scenario in which you want to change your app key. If I change this, for example, I delete this B and add a D in here. If I try to do the same thing, so load the currently authenticated user, we get a 401 response. We are sending the session ID cookie, but Laravel can't decrypt it because we're now using a different app key. The only solution for this is, again, simply relog in. So we log in again, and it will now work. Or, before changing your app key, you can take it and put it in the app previous keys environment variable. You can add it here. And let's say we are regenerating our app key. We'll do PHP artisan key generate. So the key has been changed. Let's comment these out, refresh, log in, and the request is successful because Laravel has access to the previous key and uses it to decrypt the session ID cookie. Now, in most cases I've seen, usually the problem lies in misconfiguring the Sanctum stateful domains list. Again, make sure you're not adding the protocol, make sure you don't have a trailing slash, and if it still doesn't work, jump into the ensure frontend requests are stateful middleware, add a log statement with the domain and the stateful domains list, inspect the results, and adjust your configuration accordingly.